to you from a listening buoy in the Romulan neutral zone. This is PoliTreks.
The Prime Directive, the Declaration of Human Rights, the United Federation of Planets, the United Nations, World War II, the Dominion Federation War, the Art of War, the Teachings of Sirach, Jesus Christ, Kalis the Unforgettable.
Hi, I'm Shashank.
And I'm Barry DeFord.
And welcome to PoliTreks. This is a show where we examine politics, religion, society, spiritualism through the lens of Star Trek. We take ideas and people from both of these worlds, hold them up against each other, and see if we can come up with interesting things that will help us understand our reality better and expose more ideas that seem not discussed as much. It's essentially a very thinker, politics, society, Star Trek show.
If you like Doonesbury, and you like Star Trek, and you like watching the news, and you like buddy comedies, this is basically your podcast. That's what I would say.
Especially the buddy comedy part, because we do try to get in our most original jokes. So this is also, we're also trying to get our comedy stand-up act going, apparently, which I just made up in the last 30 seconds. So this is a show where you can also hear the beginnings of what will one day be a great comedy duo.
Exactly.
Right, Barry?
I couldn't agree more, sir.
Yeah, I think of us a little bit like a great 21st century comedy duo, and I hope that's something that'll get going soon. But until we get there, which probably will be never, welcome to PoliTreks. This is our second episode, and today's episode will involve us talking mainly about The Traveler. But a couple of things have happened since we recorded our last episode that we think would be great to just talk to you guys about. We finally have a Facebook page, and we have a Twitter handle. They're both PoliTreks. That's PoliTreks. You will see our cool logo. At least we think it's really cool, with the symbol of Starfleet superimposed under with other political and popular religious symbols.
What symbol are you talking about? Because I recognize the hammer and sickle, of course, of communism, which is a form of politics, and then I recognize the United Nations, which is a political group. But what is that funny-looking thing at the bottom, Shashank? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I am so glad you asked. That is a trident. Specifically, that is Shiva's trident. It is the main weapon slash object that people associate with the god of destruction, Shiva, in Hinduism. But I've also tried to make it a very generic trident, so we can also maybe happily confuse it with the trident of Poseidon or other tridents from mythology and religion. The idea was to have one political symbol, one diplomatic slash international relationship slash society symbol, and one religion symbol, and then superimpose all of them over our traditional Starfleet symbol to get the point across about the show.
Well, that's pretty cool. I also, that little spaceship stick figure of the Enterprise, I'll just let everyone know I've been drawing that since I was about 12. So I guess I realized why I was doing it. I was preparing for this podcast.
Everything is coming together. And I have to take this opportunity to tell you, that is a very cool minimalist starship logo that I never thought we could show. But the starship itself relies on such detail. I never thought you could get away with something so minimalist, and yet you did it. That's a beautiful looking name tag.
I like that you're confusing minimalism with I can't draw, but that works too.
Shh, this is art, Barry. This is art. That's how you get things across.
Yeah, exactly. It's art, sure.
No, you can definitely draw, and that's a great logo. Anyway, I think it's there is one other thing that there are two other things that we'd like you to know about. One is our Patreon page. You can support us on Patreon through the Tricorder Transmissions Patreon page. Barry, would you like to tell us how we can get to that page?
Absolutely, I'd love to, Shashank. So like Shashank said, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter, PoliTreks. You can also find us on the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast Network website at tricordertransmissions.com. There you're going to find many other fabulous shows, such as our flagship show, the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast, other shows such as Shore Leave, Trek Ranks, Drawing Trek, many, many more. We have quite the armada starting up now. You can also call in to the show as well. Leave a voicemail at 609-512-LLAP. That's 609-512-5527. Those are some of the ways you can get a hold of us. And obviously, we always love to hear from folks who are looking for good conversation. And if you do find yourself with the ability to support us on Patreon, top right of the page, you'll find the button for that.
Usually open our show by talking about current events, and with this week's current events, here is Barry DeFord.
Thank you very much, Shashank. I would like to start our conversation off with something that's a little on the ongoing side, and by the time you guys hear this episode, I'm sure more revelations will have come out. But since the aftermath of the Harvey Weinstein sex abuse scandal that has been plaguing our society for much longer than I think we all would care to admit. One of our own, and I'm almost certain that basically one of our vocal own, as I'm sure there's probably more, but sadly, but Anthony Rapp has come forward with allegations against Kevin Spacey. Especially when Anthony was much younger, about 14 years old. So this is sort of called to question a lot of how we see power, and I think how power ends up manifesting itself. All of these people, all of these men, tend to be in these power relationships with other people, and they're using their power for sexual gratification, which, it's really hard to see and it's really hard to look at. But I really do think that unless we look at this with unflinching eyes, we're doomed to just keep repeating it. And I don't know, as our society kind of moves forward with everything, I'm always a little bit concerned that this is something that's going to get a lot of publicity now, and it might float away and become not a problem again. So, Shashank, what are your responses to just these allegations that are happening, and maybe what this calls on us, you and me as heterosexual cisgendered males? These are for the most part are the perpetrators. Sometimes not heterosexual, but a lot of these males are using their power for not good at all. What would you have to say about that?
Yeah, the pattern is very interesting. You can right off the bat see that there is a pattern of people who are abusing their power sexually. It's usually white, older male people, and it used to be mostly straight until these new revelations came out. But there is certainly a line that you can draw there. If I were to be honest, I don't think any of these events were happening recently. They're clearly things that have been happening for so long. Some of the world has learned to live with it or continue to ignore it or just push it under the rug. That disturbs me. But I think the real heroes in this entire situation are people who have finally found the courage to speak up, and people who are coming together to support these people and tell them it's okay for you to speak up, and there is a community of support and love for you to tell us to just share your story. And there is definitely much less. There is much less. Is that really what happened? Is that really sexual abuse? There's much less of that, which I appreciate a whole lot. I'm also very endeared and encouraged to note that out of such terrible circumstances, good news is coming out too. House of Cards has decided that they will not be bringing Kevin Spacey back. And if there is a future to that show, it will be without Kevin Spacey. House of Cards used to be one of my favorite TV shows. I tried to watch it after these new revelations, but I realized I cannot bring myself to watch it. That says a bit about me as a human being too. And I think it's a good thing that people have decided to examine their heroes better. And that's very much what we do with our show here. Is we try to understand better about history and the world, and re-examine everything that we thought we knew. And clearly, it is where the world is going. People are not sitting around and accepting everything at face value. So that definitely comforts me. I think what the best thing that we as cisgendered straight males can do is just listen to people. If somebody has this story to share, it's important to remember that this is all coming out now in the entertainment industry, because the entertainment industry is usually the focus of much of our news. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening elsewhere. I personally have known people who have gone through all this and they were never in the entertainment industry. They're people who work everyday jobs like you and I and have a life outside of that field. And I think the best thing we can do as males around the world, especially those who have been fortunate enough to not have gone through something like this, is just take a day out of our lives or take a minute of our day, just sit down and listen to a person and talk to them and share our feelings about it with them and tell them that we're there for them. I think that's the best thing we can possibly do.
I would agree completely. And I think maybe almost one of the most difficult things to think about as well is the times that maybe even you or I have made a woman or someone in a vulnerable state feel uncomfortable, maybe even unbeknownst to ourselves, because, especially for myself, I do recognize that I come from something of a privileged position, being where I'm from, and my 18 to 35-year-old white Anglo-Saxon male status. The only thing I have going against me is I'm left-handed, so it makes, like some desks hard, or like can openers are tough, like woe is me sort of deal. But I think to also check ourselves and make sure that we know where we are, who we are, and just try to take ourselves outside of that bubble that we live in. My students, I'm a school teacher in rural Canada, and my students asked me a question the other day: who would you like to be? Right, as if they were going to get me to say like Bruce Lee or Amelia Earhart or something like that, And I just specifically told them, and this had come up, this whole conversation had come up. I said I think I would just want to be a woman for a day, and really it would be, I would want to be a woman for a day who'd have to just like go run errands or something, because knowing I've been very close with my mom. I grew up with three very strong young women from down the street. We spent time playing in the backyard and having fun and going on camping trips and stuff like that. I'm aware that their experience of the world that I share is just completely different. And to give me that personal context, like I feel like I'm not woke or anything like that. I think though I know that I'm appalled by what's happened and what is happening and stuff like that, I know that this will call on me to think a lot more seriously about a lot of things. And yeah, I think one way to do that, if I could have any wish, it would just be to be a woman who had to go down the street, who had to drive in a car to a place, who had to go to a job interview. I think that would give me insights that I can just not possibly have in the position that I'm in right now. So I hope I don't get too heavy or too deep here or anything like that. But yeah, I think there's a lot of strength happening here. I think there's a lot of progression happening here. And for anyone who's like, well, this is just social justice warriors doing blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. This is an entire sector of our population empowering itself, taking another step forward, just like they did 100 years ago in my country by getting the vote. And that's only white women who got the vote. First Nations women would have to wait until the 1970s. So we have a long way to go. And if we think that history has ended, that's a conceit. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And I think that's as far as I can go. I would love to have maybe more of a discussion on this, but with more qualified parties than you or me, Shashank. Sadly, I don't know if we're fully qualified on all of this, but these are our thoughts, and you're welcome to respond to it and talk to us about it.
I certainly think that while we might not be qualified to talk about it from the first person point of view, there are things that we have contributed to as well, knowingly or unknowingly. First off, I'll try to tackle that social justice warrior part. I come from a country that very recently got its independence. We are not even 100 years old in terms of getting our independence and being India. We've always been the British Empire, even a little less than 100 years ago. So if there were no social justice warriors, I don't think we'd ever get our independence. So when people talk about, oh, you're a social justice warrior, social justice warriors got us the freedoms that we have in this world. So maybe take a closer look at the person you're yelling at on the internet against. Social justice warriors are definitely there are people that are out there. I'll concede to that point, but I think it's important to always have that voice. I think it's also a big reason why you and I are we don't eat meat, is because we have gotten to a point where we understand the terrible things that happen to animals in that industry. There is abuse happening there, but it's of a whole different kind. And I think the one position that we are qualified to talk to people about from our perspective is the listener's perspective, is that growing up, it's so interesting that I've been in 3 different continents throughout my life. I have been in Africa, I have been in Asia, and now I'm in the Americas. And all throughout my life, I have met female friends who at one point or another have talked about how they've been sexually abused. It's a disease that's prevalent across the world. And the best thing we can do is just listen to what they have to say and just tell them that your voice is heard and your story is believed. And if that is how you felt, we are there with you, and we're happy to do anything you'd like us to do. I think that is more than what... That is more than satisfactory to them. It gives them certain validation when somebody listens to their story and tells them they believe in what they have to tell us.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And so, yeah, hashtag #MeToo campaign. Up here in Canada, at least, there's the hashtag #IBelieveYou campaign as well. Yeah, listening. That's your and my job. And I'm very, very happy to be a part of that. So here's to some listening in the future. And present and onward. So moving on to the next piece of the news that we're going on here is in the country that Shashank calls home right now, the United States of America. There is some actual indictments taking place for Paul Manafort and a fellow by the name of Papadopoulos have been... they're being indicted for collusion, or at least I think you said something along the lines of money laundering. Was that right, Shashank?
Yeah, it's those are the official charges that Paul Manafort has been charged with. He's been charged with money laundering, but he has been indicted on about, I want to say, a little less than a dozen charges. One of them includes, for both of these, conspiracy against the United States. And I don't think that's something they've charged him with yet. And I understand why. Just from the workings of the FBI, what they traditionally do is they give people lighter sentences, people at the bottom rung, so they can squeal on people in the circle of power and help them get. They essentially help them get to the people in power, and this is what they do. They tell them, you have a dozen charges. If I give you the full, if I put on you the full wrath of these charges, you will go to jail for the rest of your life. But I'm going to let you get away with 5 years, and in return, you'll have to squeal on Jeff Sessions, or you'll have to squeal on one of the higher people working in the campaign, and we just want you to give us your recordings and come and testify, and then you can serve your 5 years and we'll call it even. That's traditionally what they do, so I'm not surprised that they have been let off with unusually lighter charges.
Yeah, and I guess just sort of the tone of all of this is just so very adversarial. Neither of us were alive for a scandal like this in the United States, but obviously a lot of people are moving toward the Watergate scandal, where obviously there was an impeachment process was put in place. Of course, the other scandal, of course, would be, or presidential one would be with Bill Clinton, and some of the sexual allegations towards him. Shashank, you live there. I mean, I'm up in I'm up on America's hat right now. How are you feeling? How are you feeling about this as an individual living in the United States? What's the tone?
What I find very fascinating is this has been just the last week has been very interesting in terms of not just what is going on with the case regarding the collusion of the Trump campaign, but the reaction to it. This is not a joke. People who are listening can go look it up. On the day the entire world was covering the Trump-Russia collusion and how Paul Manafort and George Papadopoulos were charged with possible conspiracy, Fox News for the entire day scrambled to find any news that is not the collusion campaign. They were talking early in the hour about the cheeseburger emoji. They were talking about hot Halloween costumes. They were talking about anything except for the actual collusion part. The only time they covered it was a throwaway 20-second, 30-second segment they did where they said, oh, this is happening. By the way, have you heard the thing about Google and cheeseburgers and how nobody likes their cheeseburger emoji? And the best part was people everywhere smelled it. They immediately called it. They said, we see you. We see what you're doing. And this is ridiculous. If you're going to spend every day talking about a bunch of emails that were typed on a computer, you have to cover this, and you're not. And it clearly shows that you're being a propaganda machine. I hope my political allegations aren't showing, but just objectively, you can see that all they want to do is hide people from what the real dangers are and where the world is catching up to what really happened in that campaign.
Yeah, the concept of echo chamber always comes up to me. I mean, we all consume news very differently now. Up here in Canada, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is government run, is changing the way it does its like anchored news, its national news coming up right away, where they're actually going to do smaller segments, longer segments on fewer things, and it's going to be kind of maybe a little bit more sort of through Twitter and YouTube, and they've got all these sorts of things. And I know that some news agencies and whatnot in the United States have started to do this, but I almost wonder if the 24 hours news cycle, with its divulgence of information on a constant basis, especially if you're trying to sort of engineer a narrative. It's funny how you're saying they're talking about emojis and all this. It's almost like they're trying to engineer a slow news day when they do talk about like puppies or about like a new type of shingle. Or just kind of whatever and stuff like that.
Absolutely. It's like them trying to throw a blanket over a house on fire and say, there is nothing wrong here. This is completely fine. Please walk away and continue the rest of your day to pretend like everything is normal. It's also happening on the social media groups and people on the internet. They still refuse to believe that there is some kind of collusion that happened. If you just follow the paper trail on this, we know that Donald Trump Jr. met with Russians. We know that there were Russian propaganda machines throughout the campaign. We now know that there are 2 people who've been charged with collusion or will be charged with collusion or have been indicted on collusion. And yet there are people who want to deny that. And that reminds me so much of Picard and Four Lights and just that entire that Cardassian Picard kerfuffle that happens. I can't help but go back to that.
And so do you think they're actually just shouting what Picard was saying?
I think that Picard trying to hang on to reality through that light board is all of us right now. We're trying to hang on to the 4 lights, even though everybody else is telling us that's not how many lights there are. It's certainly there is certainly a denial of clear reality that's happening.
Yeah, what I was gonna say here in that respect is maybe it's something more of like a doublethink in action. I don't know if any of our listeners are familiar with Orwell. I teach him in my diploma level English course, and I sort of think of the idea here of if people accept the reality that they're given, they'll tend to comply with its parameters, even if they know something is wrong.
That is a great segue into our main topic today, because if I'm not wrong, that is a quote from The Traveler.
I'm not sure if it's a direct quote, but if not, I mean, it's something that he espouses basically every time he shows up. So yeah, let's go on to that main topic then.
Welcome back, everyone. Our main topic today is a very underrated character in Star Trek, particularly The Next Generation. He's a character who, in my opinion, has never gotten the full justice the character deserves. If I was alive back then, I would start a letter writing campaign called Justice for Traveler. And it just seems so wrong to me that this character was not as realized as he should have been. And I say that knowing that he is probably not the right term, because the Traveler in the first minute of his introduction says, I would give you my real name, but it's unpronounceable to human beings. That is just how incredible that character is.
When I think of that, I always think of the Simpsons with Kang and Kodos, and they're like, in order to pronounce my name correctly, I'd have to pull out your tongue. That's the cynical side, I guess. But absolutely, Shashank, the Traveler gets this rap among a lot of my Trek friends who are like, well, he's sort of whatever. He's not a. Some people wonder if he's like a half-baked character, or if he's too connected to Wesley, and Wesley's character never got fully realized, or he showed up, however, in Gene Roddenberry's time, right? Gene Roddenberry was still executive producer and would have been a creative force behind his inception. So that's sort of where I was coming from when you first talked to me about this episode, was like, oh, we're gonna talk about that guy who shows up in 3 episodes and sort of pals around with Wesley and sends the Enterprise to unfathomable parts of the universe and then just sort of phases out. So I'm happy you've decided to get us there. So I would get you to start us off with maybe some of your initial points about this much maligned and maybe not fully understood character.
Absolutely. One of the first things that we talked about when we came up with PoliTreks is how to approach characters that people don't often talk about. And the Traveler was the first one I went to. And Barry was quick to remind me that there is deep hate for this character, which I never understood because I was, for better or for worse, out of that fan bubble where apparently everybody knows that the Traveler is a terrible character. I have a theory just to start off with the Traveler and Gene Roddenberry. It's often, it's well known in Trek circles that Wesley Crusher's character is a stand-in for a young Gene Roddenberry. The character himself is very much like a young Gene Roddenberry. And I think to mirror that, the Traveler is an older Gene Roddenberry. The Traveler is a real-life is a Star Trek's real-life version of what Gene Roddenberry would have been like. He would have stopped everyone and said, hey, stop worrying about your petty little quarrels. Look at this giant universe we are in that is full of ideas and infinite possibilities and places that humanity is not even conceived of. Let's go there. Why are we wasting our time with the Borg and spaceships and amassing property and trying to get people under our wing? Why don't we go to this fascinating, philosophically unexplored place where we can actually understand what we're meant to understand from the universe? That I think is a good definition in terms of Star Trek and the Traveler. Just ideologically, the Traveler is a character that is the complete antithesis of what Star Trek characters are usually about. All Star Trek characters are typically involved in real-world squabbles. They're deeply invested in an emotional conflict that involves either other characters or other cultures or a particular time and place. The Traveler has none of that. The Traveler is a character whose entire purpose is to understand. The first main really profound quote that comes up with him in the show that attaches to our topic today is when Picard leans over him on where no one has gone before and asks, what is the purpose of his journey? And then the Traveler immediately replies, curiosity. I think that is such a good connection to us as human beings, particularly young, starry-eyed people who read philosophical books, who read fiction that makes them think, who like sci-fi that makes them think, who like things that are beyond spaceships fighting each other. The Traveler in that way is such a thinker-heavy character. He's there to make you feel and understand things that you didn't even think of possible. It's a very good mirror to those of us that might not immediately respond to the Starfleet's journey, wouldn't you say?
I would agree in the sense that Star Trek is definitely a show that tries to represent humanity and explore humanity more than it's exploring space. And of course, there's been a lot of wonderful science that has come out of the science fiction within Star Trek. To represent the Traveler as sort of that distillation of wonder that Gene Roddenberry himself had, I think is a really good point to make. Part of me wonders, though, if his arrival on the scene of Star Trek in the 5th episode of the first season, which, I mean, though I do have to say I enjoy watching it for my own sake. If I was to try to get someone into Star Trek, I definitely wouldn't start with the first season of The Next Generation. It's a little chaotic. I think it's really trying to find its feet still. And I wonder sometimes if maybe on a practical level, that's why the Traveler had such a hard start, was because he was placed very early into the season and into the series, when the series was still trying to figure out what it was. Like, imagine if it showed up, imagine if he showed up, or she, the Traveler, can we really call him he or she or it? But we'll go with he just for the sake of it, because a male actor plays him. But he shows up, in a kind of a confusing time. So what I'm sort of wondering here is can we instead look at him more objectively? Because I think maybe sometimes he gets coached into the first season of Star Trek, and a lot of people go, well, that's the season with Code of Honor, and stuff like that, and that makes you be like, ugh, it's all kind of weird synthy stuff and kind of cheesy effects, and everyone's still wearing pajamas rather than those lovely kind of Mandarin style outfits that we see later. I don't know.
You're right. You're right. That is the lowest point of Star Trek. That's another point that I'll consider, is that Code of Honor is as low as Star Trek has gone. But I think the Traveler episodes, particularly where no one has gone before, is one of the higher points that the show has gone to. It's that very Roddenberry, very Carl Sagan, very Stephen Hawking, very Neil deGrasse Tyson, just very futuristic idea of there is a place in the universe that nobody has ever gone to where time, space, and thought originate. There is this place that, to quote Picard's mother in that episode, is this the end of the universe, or is this the beginning? If a place where you start is where all time, space, and thought originate, just imagine the places you could go to from there. Imagine how different our universe would be if everybody were connected to what the Traveler had in mind.
Well, that's basically, I think, to hear that at the writers' meeting when they would have had it back in 1986 or something like that, putting this all together, I think an argument like that came forward. My counterpoint, or at least my question about that, is they go to this place where time and thought and space all kind of intermingle with each other, and it doesn't even to bother even saying what stardate it is doesn't matter, that sort of stuff. I would say, if that's so important, they go there for that episode, and then they proceed to not go there for several seasons, and they have their kind of interpersonal squabbles and stuff like that, and do all these other sorts of more practical things. And definitely they get into that higher end of thinking and philosophy of Star Trek. But the Traveler shows up, sets this bar, like you say, and then proceeds to not show up again for several seasons. I think season 3 is the next time he shows up, and then season 7, very, very at the end, right? So I wonder sometimes if that's maybe one of the issues, is he places this large, kind of overarching idea, this, go to new sets of the universe, new places, different galaxies, M33, let's go, let's get out of here. And then they spend most of their time after that in the alpha, beta, and maybe a bit of the gamma quadrant, and that's it.
I would like to think, just because I'm a Trek lover and an optimist, that after the Enterprise came back, they at least reported their findings about such a place existing, and they might have sent a few science vessels there with the help of whatever technology they had on their hand at that point. But I don't think also you can get there without the Traveler, because he tells us that he's a lens to focus thought on. He tells us that he can fold time and space, and you see him phase in and out of our reality so he can take us to these places. I do think fundamentally the reason why we don't see a whole lot of him is because of the audience response. Is after you told me about the hate for this character, I went in and looked at a lot of it, and it comes from a place of fanboyism. It comes from a place of, that is not the Trek I know, except that it is so much the Trek you know, it just isn't presented to you in the form that you're usually treated to. So that's why they said, we don't want to have another character that is spewing philosophy, because we already have Picard to do that. We have Data to do that. We have all these other characters that are there to give us philosophy. We don't want another character who's doing that. Show us the fights, show us the effects, show us what we came for, give us our money's worth. I think there was a lot of, because that's the goal of Star Trek, or at least one of the goals, is to get a big fan base, to make a lot of money, which the show succeeded on. But one of the casualties or something like that was a great food for thought that was provided through a character like the Traveler. Here's this character that is sitting in front of you, this space Carl Sagan, this space Socrates, who's telling you, hey, my entire purpose here is to understand. I just want to know what there is to know. And I already know and understand so much, but there is so much more to know. Can we just go there and explore that? I think that is, to the show's misfortune, an opportunity that wasn't explored enough.
Wait, are you saying that there was some people who were really upset with a change in the way Star Trek was run in the 80s? I thought that was something only we have now. Just joking.
History repeats itself, Patty.
Oh, doesn't it? I guess the other thing, and there's a lot that you've said there that I kind of want to unpack. Like, first of all, they go to a completely different galaxy for 10-ish minutes, and then they go to the end of the universe for probably 20-ish minutes, and you're just hoping that someone is hit the record button, as we do sometimes when we have our long podcast chats, and it's like, oh, we didn't record any of that. Whoopsie doodle. Or imagine that kind of beardy chief engineer. I don't know I can't remember what happens to him, but obviously that becomes Geordi later, so Mr. Beardy disappears. Maybe he had the data key or something and dropped it down a vent, and he's like, oh crap, they're gonna fire me for this or something. I don't know. The other piece of that, though, is another maybe kind of connection, is you're saying he's folding space and time. He can get places really, really fast. I wonder if he knows any tardigrades, and if he hangs out with them at all, because he's also representing a form of horrifically efficient space travel. But yeah, it comes at the cost of him phasing out of existence to do it. So if we
it's
a tardigrade in every ship or a traveler in every ship, boy, we'd be getting everywhere really fast.
That's right, but I'm sure with the Traveler there'll be a lot less. He clearly looks much less physically intimidating than the tardigrade, so I wouldn't think people would immediately go to the tardigrade as compared to our friend the Traveler. But I also think it's incredible the way that episode ends. Is it's not just him traveling through time and space. Picard goes on the space intercom and tells everyone, hey guys, think yourself giving your strength to the Traveler. So it's not just him. He has gotten everyone on the ship thinking their way back into the present from this crazy future that they've gone to. It's so fascinating that everybody on that ship unknowingly went to a place, and they ended up in that kerfuffle. But the way they came back was not as a disjointed group, but everyone fused into one big thought bubble. They were all one individual, one entity who was folding time and space. I think that is such a good metaphor for the possibilities that we can get to in our lives if we all mingled in harmony and peace in our world.
It's that kind of singular resonance that Picard is quite as a matter of fact ordering them to do. But I don't know. There's something that almost kind of harkens for me to that moment. I've studied martial arts for a long time, and in karate we always go into zazen from kneeling in what's called seiza. So you kneel down and you just sort of shut your mind off for a second. Everyone kind of tries to get into the same headspace. No words are said or anything like that. I almost wonder if perhaps that's an element of it. That if we can all just get ourselves into the right headspace, really, there's nothing we can't do. I also wonder too. I was raised in a Roman Catholic family, and we would get together to pray together from time to time. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen for me as much anymore, but I often found myself kind of in a similar space as the people who I was with, my family members, friends, or anyone who had joined us for that. So, regardless of what maybe your faith is, there is something centering to everyone just sort of focusing on the same thing. And I often think, wow, if we could actually center ourselves like that, maybe we can travel faster than warp.
It's certainly interesting. And I will preface my thoughts, because I know we discussed this before about religion and a character like the Traveler. I'll preface my thought by saying that it is not our intention with this podcast to offend people, but there are things that need to be said that we believe represent what the show is about. We need to re-examine things both in Star Trek and in the real world. Religions tend to preach equality. They tell us that we're all one and the same. But for being one and the same, gods across our religions are awfully tribal, aren't they? They come across as figures that clearly are choosing one person over another. They talk about how you need to believe, you need to show your faith to me in a certain way. And this is not just Christianity. It's Islam, it's Hinduism, it's religions that you can think of that have gods, usually tend to be favoring a certain school of thought over another, while the Traveler is the exact opposite. His entire purpose of existence is, I really don't care about the things that are happening in your world, because what I care about is so far removed. I want to go where time, space, and thought come from. I want to see where that originated. I want to stand in front of the face of what we all think is God and ask him questions. I do not care about you trying to find another planet.
I would say to a degree, though, there is something. I feel very much like the Traveler has a thing for the Crushers. He picks Wesley once he sees Wesley's abilities, and I can't help but notice that he does take sort of a liking to him. Now, his relationship with Wesley, I would say, is very sort of, there's a detachment to a degree. He lets Wesley do his own thing. He lets Wesley, by journey's end, Wesley's pretty frustrated, and the Traveler hasn't been there to interact with him really at all. So, my argument may not stand up fully, but if you think about the more known religions, when God comes to speak to the people, there is a definitely an affirmation of, I have taken interest in you. You are important to me, and I'm really coming from, because I was raised in Western society, like the three monotheisms, right? Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. In that, you do have a God that has taken great interest in a specific person or people. And maybe there's a parallel there we could say with the Traveler and Wesley, but yeah, that would presuppose that the Traveler is himself a god, and I don't think he professes that. I don't think he's interested in being that. He's much more interested in, like you said, the journey, the curiosity.
Absolutely, I would completely accept that argument if instead of the Traveler you said Q. Q comes very much like Space Loki to Picard and says, I have taken an interest in you. I'm going to play around with you and just have fun with you. Q is a much better representation of that side of God than the Traveler is. The Traveler, if anything, is really, he's the man on the mountain. He's the character who in any fiction is telling us nothing matters. He's telling you what you're doing will ultimately not matter in the bigger realm of things, but don't worry, because there is such a big, unfathomable, unforeseeable, incredible experience waiting for you to happen. I told you the story earlier, but I'll also tell it for our listeners because I don't think it's talked about enough. It's the story of the Bhagavad Gita and where it started. The Bhagavad Gita starts with a prince having a crisis of faith. He's standing in front of a battlefield with tens of thousands of soldiers, and the tens of thousands of soldiers are being led by his own brothers. And there is a war in Hinduism that is one of our great epics. It's called the Mahabharata, which translates to the Great War. And in that war, what essentially is happening is a prince and his brothers are forced to fight their own brothers. It's a battle between families. And just as he's about to go out into this battlefield, he stops and looks at the fact that if he draws his sword, the blood that sword will draw will be of his brothers, and he cannot handle that. So he falls to his knees and starts crying in front of everyone at the battlefield, just as he's about to start this war and begin this great epic. And that's when his charioteer, who is Lord Krishna, one of the avatars of Vishnu, who's one of our Trinity, sits him down and tells him, "You're worrying about something that essentially is so irrelevant in the realm of greater things. What you're doing today is your duty, but you're really contributing to a cog in the giant machine of the universe." And then Krishna becomes the universe. He transforms himself into his fully realized avatar, and he shows that inside himself is this prince, his brothers, their generations of families, everything in the world and the universe. And he says, everything is within me, and what you're worrying about is so minute, and your duty is minute, but it's important for you to fulfill this so the universe can go on.
That's when you told me that, it really, I mean, that definitely made me think to Carl Sagan when he has the Voyager probe is orbiting Saturn at the moment. It's doing its slingshot and it's taking pictures, and they're like, well, let's take some more pictures. And he's like, great, take a picture of Earth. And they do, and it's that pale blue dot. And he's like, wow, just think of really how insignificant we are in this vast cosmic dark. The rivers of blood. You've mentioned the idea of a sword being drawn and spilling the blood of brothers, right? And really, I mean, I think that's the one big thing that I'm finding out as I get older here is humans, all of us, I mean, we're all one species. We're all brothers and sisters. We really need to start treating each other that way, because this is getting pretty stupid. But outside of that, he says, maybe by looking at it this way, you can fully understand just how incredibly insignificant this conflict that you're pushing is, and to a degree, maybe it'll kind of reduce our self-importance, and maybe that's another thing about the Traveler that I appreciate, and what I sort of connected to that was again from that first Where No Man Has Gone Before.
Where no one has gone before, Barry.
Sorry, yes, Where No One Has Gone Before. My apologies. I've been watching a lot of TOS. And Star Trek Continues. Go watch that show, everyone, please. But anyways, not now. Listen to the rest of the podcast, then go watch it.
Yes, please. We have very, very interesting things that would please like you to listen to.
Yeah. Anyway, so the Traveler almost curtly turns to, I believe it was Wesley, and just or to either Riker or Picard, and he just says, "Oh, your species only now merits serious investigation," right? Like,
yeah, to
an audience in 1987, right, are watching a person who's representing a sort of a four-dimensional being who says to people 400 years from where the 1987 viewers are watching, saying that only now, 400 years in the future from 1987, does your species merit any real any serious investigation. And for me, that I don't know, there's a moment of like, what? No, we're interesting. Like, I mean, we always talk about how interesting we are as people, and it's like, I don't know, people often say, like, oh, are aliens visiting Earth and stuff, and are we being visited? And I went to Star Trek Las Vegas, obviously, and when I left Las Vegas in McCarran Airport, I picked up a book about aliens just for the interest of it and read it on the flight back. But then I stopped and was like, are we really that interesting to aliens? Would we be? Like, are we that cool? I mean, I think about Radiohead, of all these were people who lock up their spirits, drill holes in themselves, and live for their secrets. I don't know. So that definitely resonated for me. And when you brought up that idea of the avatar of Vishnu, Krishna, getting to the size of the universe and saying, see? I think sometimes to accept your own insignificance is a type of growth.
The idea that aliens might find us interesting is so out there. Excuse the pun. It certainly seems like we do seem a little too self-important. If somebody were to map out our history, our species history specifically, all they would find is one version or another of us fighting for our resources. That is really all that we've done, and maybe throw a few objects in space. That's as far as we've gone. So I don't know if we merit the interest. So I completely see where the traveler is coming from. And speaking about when you say we are all one species and we should stop fighting because this is stupid, you immediately make me think of the first from The Chase. And really, we both are calling it the first because there is no name for these humanoids. In the episode The Chase, the first tell everybody standing there, the Klingons, the Romulans, everybody standing there, they tell them, you all are coming from my body. We are all one and the same. Stop fighting. This is stupid.
And then the Dominion War happens.
Yeah. There is definitely a connection between the first and the traveler. I think the race of the traveler, if there really is a race, or maybe their species are beyond our human understanding, which also I find fascinating, might have existed through time and space, and they might have been there. And these are some of the things that they know already, is that everybody is one and the same. They are really fighting about things that they'll ultimately all come together on. And that's not what we should be worried about. We should be worried about what's next, what's after that, what else is waiting there in the unknown for us. But on the flip side of that, there is a character like Q. Q he's maniacal, he's selfish, he's cynical, he wants his way. That is the complete opposite of the traveler. The traveler can shapeshift. The traveler can fold time and space. The traveler is a lens to focus thought. So there is a little bit of superhumanity or superheroism within this character that he can very well exploit, but he chooses not to.
Yeah. Because
his motivations are so different than Q's.
My question is, can he manifest a mariachi band? Because Q can do that. No, I like that idea of how he and Q are so different, and you look at again the audience reaction. Q really shouldn't have been a character to make it through, but I believe it was fellow friend podcasters Dan and Bill who just mentioned how much of a great actor John Delancey is. He just delivers it every single time. And I'm not trying to say that the actor who played the Traveler isn't a good actor by any stretch. I think he does a fantastic job. But I think we enjoy the person who can come in and just kick down the card castle, which is kind of what Q tends to do, right? I still don't think I'm quite over him introducing us to the Borg. I don't think I'm over him just bothering Picard all of the time. Picard's such a nice guy, and go away kind of thing, back and forth. And I've always loved how Sisko reacts, just punches him in the face, and so with that, I like the idea of Q being sort of this other side of omnipotence, right? There's one side that is just so full of awe and wonder, and then there's another one who's just basically Schmucky the clown, and he just likes to stir the pot. He just likes to spike the punch. He just wants to be the knot in the rug constantly.
I think that's what DS9 learned so well, is that they realized we need to show both these sides. We need to show the awe and the wonder. We need to show man explaining time through baseball. And we also need to show the possible end of the universe with two people fighting. And then we need to have all that within these super beings. I think the Traveler and characters like Q were touchstones for the Prophets. I think that's where they came from. They decided, if we're going to show these super beings, let's not show them as one thing or another. Let's show them as fully realized, fully human, or at least fully understandably human characters with characteristics that we can relate to. Because the prophets are, over the course of DS9, they're both good and bad. They bring you A, they bring you B. They put you in situations where you quite don't know what's happening, and that speaks a little bit to the ideas that Star Trek carries, and that futuristic sci-fi can show you, is that no matter where you go, you'll always have people like the Traveler, but on the flip side, you'll have characters like Q and the Prophets.
Well, and also, to build on that, the Prophets also really bridge the story of the Prophets really bridged that idea of science and religion, right? To some, they're the wormhole aliens. And I go back to what the Traveler says. He takes interest in Wesley for Wesley's understanding of science, and yet at the same time he tells Wesley in Remember Me, forget the math, right? Think beyond the math. Go somewhere else. Get out of there. So that conflict or struggle or sort of, we can't quite parse out where science should end and that spiritualism, call it religion or whatever, begins. It's always very difficult to get that proper mix. And I appreciate Star Trek for looking into it and trying to bring that out to varying success rates, right? Obviously, the Prophets had a bit more realized arc, so did Q, and the Traveler doesn't. So do you think that the Traveler is more on the side of science, or do you think he's more on the side of this kind of spiritualism, the idea of constructed reality through thought? Where would you put him, Shashank?
That is a very good question. And I think I know why you're asking me that question. With the Traveler, I think they're both one and the same. I think science, religion, spiritualism, they all are thought. That's what he is about. He talks about how we can do incredible things with thought. As we speak, there is a big budget Hollywood movie coming out called Thor. There is an entire argument that the Norse gods that we think of are really space aliens. And so their story is sci-fi. And then there is an entire argument that no, these are gods. We need to pray to them and sacrifice goats to them so they'd be happy. There is this idea that is a thing or an object that teaches about future or gives us a certain point of view. Is it God or is it science? And I think the idea with the Traveler that never went through, and which I'll always be sad for, is that he was trying to teach us that it's all one and the same. The character tells us that time and space are something I can fold. And if you're within time and space and you are something that comes up from your mind is a thought, an idea, they're all one and the same. They fall under a point that is not the destination, but the means to an end that is so incredible you can't even conceive of it right now.
That sort of makes me think here, and I'm probably not going to get it precise, but I believe it was I'm forgetting the quote right now, and I'm not going to hop on my browser to do it, folks. I'm just going to go ahead. So correct us. This is actually your opportunity to go on Twitter, follow PoliTreks, or go on Facebook, or both, follow PoliTreks, and get me up to speed. Who said this? This is our trivia moment. It's trivia. Who said any technology sufficiently advanced will be indistinguishable from magic? Because that's
that's a good one,
right? That's I think maybe where you're getting at here, or kind of how I'm understanding your point is Can the Traveler really even be put there? Because he's so far ahead of us that anything he does is going to look like he's pulling a rabbit out of his hat. Whereas if I took my iPhone to I don't know, someone in the 1200s and did stuff with it, they'd probably be quite impressed and would think I'm some kind of wizard. I don't know. I don't know anyone from the 1200s, so I don't know precisely how they would react, but I would say...
Oh, I have some friends. I'll hook them up with you. They like carrier pigeons. You just have to write letters. It's great. We'll talk about it after the show.
Okay, good. So yeah, I think maybe that's another little piece of it as well, is we tout ourselves to be so incredibly advanced, and so does our friends in the 24th century with Picard and his ship, that maybe there's something almost a little bit not in terms of a danger, but there'd be maybe a threat or I wouldn't call it a resentment, but sort of yeah, well, what do you know kind of thing to someone who does just sort of not bother with the mundane. They don't bother with those sorts of things. They are sort of living in that higher actualization range of human thought that we can find ourselves from time to time. But I don't know, it seems like every now and again, just like Q, we have to go back and kick down the card castle because we get bored or frustrated or something.
Absolutely. These people exist on a separate plane of thought. Their mind starts with the clouds in which we daydream. And the Traveler is just not a fictional character that exists in a realm of fiction. We've had people like that over time. We've had Socrates, we've had Aristotle, we've had Leonardo da Vinci, we've had Buddha, and there is one philosopher that I would like to take this opportunity to tell you about from India. But before I get to that, it's very important to realize that these are people that we are asked to study when we're children. And when we're young and our minds are impressionable, their quotations are read to us, their lives are told to us, and they tell us this is a good way to live. And somehow over time, that just becomes the idea of a good, fully realized life becomes different. Our heroes become different. That's a throwback to our first episode, Heroes Often Fail, which you should listen to if you already haven't. They teach us that these are people who think differently, who have different ideas, who look at ways differently. That's the way to go. But somehow over time, it's a flaw within our human programming that's not what we tend to gravitate to. And I think that's another crime that happened to the Traveler, is that we never went there. Speaking of just crime to the Traveler, I would like to take this opportunity to tell everyone listening about Eric Menyuk, the actor who played the character. Should we get into that a little bit, Barry?
I think so. And then I wouldn't mind learning more about the Indian philosopher from the early 20th century. So we'll start with Mr. Menyuk, and then we'll move on beyond that.
Okay, this is a bit of a tangent, but we just wanted to give a shout out to Eric Menyuk, the actor who played the Traveler. In research for our show, we studied up on the actor, and after finishing his role on Star Trek, he retired from acting. And he joined the law school for personal decisions, and he's now an attorney fighting for children with disabilities and children's rights in general. So we're just sending some podcast love to him, and we hope he listens to this. We just think the Traveler is an incredible character, and he's a wonderful human being.
Yeah, to build on that. My older brother is 39 as of the time of recording. He's 39 just recently. And my brother was born with cerebral palsy and epilepsy, quite severe, and was never fully able to walk or talk. Spent a lot of his early adult life in and out of status epilepticus from his seizure activity. He's also had pneumonia a number of times and has very much come close to death. So I've mentioned before that I'm a teacher, I'm a school teacher, but my brother is the real teacher here, about the value of life. And to know that Mr. Menyuk has gone on to fight for the people like my brother, that really means a lot, and sort of sells me on the concept of who the Traveler is as well, because I think he's a teacher as well. And so that's just something that really means a lot. So yes, Mr. Menyuk, if you're listening, thank you for what you do. It's wonderful, and it's amazing that people like yourself have fought hard to allow it so that my brother can live 39 years when even if he was born 10 years earlier, he would have never made it this far. It's a wonderful thing to know that my brother can still enjoy this world and explore and do things that people of his operational level may not have been able to do just a short while ago.
That is beautiful. I'm fortunate that we can do something like that through our podcast. Is give out love to people who definitely deserve it. And I will try to read your quotation because I think that is the best way to getting to know this philosopher. He's the philosopher that immediately I thought of when I first ran into the Traveler on TNG. He's a philosopher that is very well known across India. If you stop anyone on the street, the chances are that person would know who this philosopher is, even though he lived over 100 years ago and did not live a very long life. The quote is as follows: "We are what our thoughts have made us, so take care about what you think. Words are secondary. Thoughts live. They travel far." The philosopher's name is Swami Vivekananda, and he was born in 1863 and died in 1902. He's generally regarded as the first Indian philosopher, the first Hindu philosopher to bring Hinduism into the mainstream of the world. He's very well known for making a speech at the Parliament of World Religions in Chicago in the late 19th century, toward the end of the century. He's very well known for bridging the gap between people who have an idea of a god and people who are spiritual. His thought process and his quotations and his way of life is very much revolves around, you don't need to have an idea of a bearded god or a lady god or a group of gods. You need to have something that you feel is spiritual to you, something that you think will transcend your existence beyond your body. And cling to that idea, cling to that power, and realize that we are all one and the same. Realize that our power lies within ourselves as a species. Realize that no matter what your struggle is, no matter who your God is, it's important much more to have that power so you can live your life in a fully realized way, as opposed to clinging to one idea of one face or one body. That Swami Vivekananda very much, to me, is a real-world version of the Traveler. He taught the entire world about how it's important not to rely on a certain human definition of a god because that is so small, but instead to understand that everybody's struggle is what makes them the same. Everybody's faith is what makes them the same. And the power of humanity is that we are all stronger when we understand that we're really just one entity.
That's a fascinating outlook, and I'm just sort of getting to know Swami Vivekananda, and I don't think I said his name properly, but that's I'm still picking that up to a degree. But the idea that we are stronger together because of our differences, and those differences, if understood as really just different, maybe almost sort of avatars, because we've used that word quite a bit here, can bring us together a lot more. What I always like is the idea of the enemy's story is a lot like mine, and if you think about it that way, you don't want to hurt them, because if we do separate ourselves by this and that, and maybe even to a level of belief, that can really hurt us. And obviously, I come from a Western background, raised in a Christian household, and I think about the philosophies of Jesus Christ and a lot of things that he think about who he hung out with. Right, he hung out with the poor, he hung out with the outcast, because he saw in them beauty and goodness, and to maybe connect that to a degree, who would he be hanging out with right now? I think him and Swami Vivekananda would probably enjoy each other's company to a degree, if that's the case, because they're looking at something maybe a little bit deeper. To go back to the Traveler on that, and my question to you there is, when you saw the Traveler, did you think immediately about this philosopher, or did this take some time?
The most intriguing thing, even when everybody who's listening will at some point go back and watch where no one has gone before, the most intriguing thing about the Traveler is that he has a smile on his face. It's very it's not immediately noticeable. It's subtle. He has a little grin. He almost is taking comfort in knowing where everything is going to go. And I think my theory is that his definition of reality is different from ours, and he almost sees what is going to happen when he gets on that ship, which is why when everybody's in deep panic, you'll see that he never raises his voice, he never expresses a lot of fear or apprehension. There is a smile to him that led me to believe, oh, this character is going to be different. This character is not like everybody else. And he has the outlook of a philosopher too. If you look at him, this guy can fold time and space, right?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous that a man who can fold time and space wouldn't be a little more of a showman than he is. He's wearing a simple robe and he has no jewelry on him. All he has is a little suitcase that he uses to, I'm guessing, repair ships. I do think even the little case that he's asked to carry is it's meant to throw people away, because when we're introduced, he's shown as an apprentice.
Yeah, to a complete and total turd as well.
Yeah.
I was watching Trek Ranks, or I was going through Trek Ranks and seeing what the illustrious Mr. Jim Morehouse was having to say about it. And yeah, Kaczynski's a total turd. And it's interesting how he's sort of, it's the perfect shield.
It's to a character like that, he even when we meet him later on, he's never a showman. He never has something that would give him an air of, oh, I am more powerful than you are. If anything, he looks harmless and a little frail, which is very interesting because Eric Menyuk was once considered to play the role of Data. He was a finalist. He almost got there. And I think this was what the show gave him as consolation for him to for his participation in his contribution to the auditions. But yeah, the character itself is a complete physical and mental departure from each other. And when I looked at that, even if you look at pictures of Swami Vivekananda, and he spelled Vivekananda, if you just type that in, you'll find a lot of pictures of him. He's usually wearing a robe that fully covers him. And he's wearing a turban, and that's all that he's always worn. And so when I saw that air of austerity, that air of simplicity that the traveler had, my head immediately went to, oh, that reminds me of Vivekananda, because Vivekananda had all the knowledge in the world. Power is the wrong word. He was very popular. He was known around different parts of the world as someone under a colonized nation. This was a lot of control to exercise, and at no point do you see him being a showman about it. He's such an austere, simple person. So that connection immediately put both of them together in my head.
Would you say that there might be a bit of an agreement or a parlay or maybe even an inspiration for Gandhi later?
Absolutely. I do think you should know that before Gandhi became what he became, he used to be a lawyer. So he was compelled and obliged to dress a certain way. And I think he saw that people responded to austerity and simplicity. So not only was that personal, he realized I have a chance to make a statement by giving up these earthly clothes. And there was a whole movement where he inspired the entire country to bring out all their clothes and specifically all their British-made clothes and belongings. And they used to burn them in the streets. As part of their social revolution, they rejected these English goods and said, we're going to make our own clothes because we are our own country and we don't need to be controlled by the British. And that came from, I would be very surprised if Swami Vivekananda wasn't a touchstone for Gandhi and several other revolutionaries who were desperate for our voice to be opened up.
So if we were to take the traveler's ethos then, curiosity, to, there's a point where Beverly Crusher in Remember Me is stuck in her own phase world, the warp bubble's closing on her, and Wesley is frustratingly trying to get her to go through the little kind of the connection between the warp bubble and reality, and he's like, I can't get her to go through, and at that moment the traveler says, she must choose to walk through it herself. If we were to juxtapose that to the Prime Directive, do you think there's a bit of conversation there? That if we were to say, like what the Prime Directive is with the Federation, to choose to walk through yourself, and the Federation's choice to not communicate with warp-ready societies, is there something there?
There is, but there is also an immediate revelation that you'll have when you look at both of these. You're right. The Prime Directive states that people can choose whether or not to communicate with us, but so often, at least from all the Star Trek we've seen, a lot of the adventures revolve around people violating that directive. And that shows our human flaw. While the Traveler clearly tells Wesley she has to choose to walk through it herself, and she does, and that's how Remember Me is resolved, a lot of the resolutions that do not come to fruition on our show is because people violate the Prime Directive, one way or another, knowingly or unknowingly, usually through our narrow-minded definition of, hey, maybe what he's doing is for the greater good. Just an idea like that immediately goes to violating the Prime Directive. So there is this. I think that's another fascinating expose on the Traveler. He's a body of thoughts, and everything he does is conceived, made, starts and ends with thought. But Starfleet's Prime Directive is thought and action. It tells you this is the rule, so you end up breaking it, and you find a way around it. So there is that immediate dichotomy between what happens if a thought is pure and what happens if a thought is violated or abused.
That's fascinating, the idea of thought versus action, and then thought and action. I'm brought around to, you were talking about a historical figure from your country, Swami Vivekananda, and I can't.
Good job.
I did it! Yay! I'm brought to a member of Canadian history by the name of Chief Poundmaker. Poundmaker was a Cree chief in the late 1800s who gave himself up after a successful battle against the Northwest Mounted Police, a proto-version of the RCMP that we would know today. He gives himself up, and basically for the sake of just ensuring that his people won't see any more physical fighting. Of course, his people are subject to a different type of violence over the next 150 years, but Poundmaker's whole intention is to ensure that he is instead taken instead of his people. What I see about that is a transcendent experience actually I had at his gravesite. I felt almost communicated with, to be honest, and I can't really explain it, and I don't really have to, I don't think. Sometimes they're just things you feel. And the Traveler communicates with Wesley right off the bat, and it takes a long time for Wesley to kind of figure out where he's supposed to be with everything, and I felt something very similar to that. And so though Poundmaker isn't a direct representation of the Traveler, he is definitely sending me a very specific message about where I stand in my own country's history as someone from a different side of that history from Poundmaker, but still an inheritor of that history. And so with that, I also think about Picard in that episode, the final episode, Journey's End, and how he ends up being told that if he doesn't do anything about this, he sort of inherits the crimes of his ancestors. With that, I think about what I need to do, and I try to do it as much as I can as a teacher, and that's open up that discussion as a Canadian citizen, and to the little Canadian citizens who I get to spend my days with every single day. The Traveler's story is one of patience with someone who isn't quite there yet, and I feel very much like a person who isn't quite there yet. But there is sort of a single-minded approach to it, and I think Swami Vivekananda brings that up with his very, very important quote.
Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached.
Exactly, and I think about the goal that the Indigenous First Nations people in the episode have, and they're not going to walk away from that goal because there's something greater at stake. The same thing would stand to reason for the Traveler as well. He has a goal, and that goal is larger than the people around him and the people with him. And it takes a while for Wesley to realize that he's a part of that goal as well. And I appreciate those little connections that we can make to these characters, even though they are to some degree maybe maligned in our larger Trek family. But that's something that I think kind of sort of finished things off nicely for me with the Traveler. He represents something greater, if not maybe realized as well as we would have liked. I think it's important.
I think in that regard, the Traveler achieves his ambition. He was able to, for you, evoke someone from your culture that represents something noble, and for me, was able to evoke someone from my culture that was so noble, and now we are able to preach about them. We're able to bring to the airwaves voices that people would not have known otherwise. So I think in that regard, the Traveler is a fascinating character, to say the least, but also a character that is stronger than people give him credit for. Before we jump into your final thoughts, I will try to conclude our main topic today by just talking a little bit more about what I think is an injustice. I really think one of the things that the show could have done but didn't is spend more time with the Traveler. I'm sure there are people who would have sat and watched hundreds of episodes like Where No One Has Gone Before, that are so far removed from what Star Trek represents usually, because the transcendence that you were talking about, the transcendence of we don't matter, what matters is waiting to be yet discovered, that idea is what Star Trek aspires to. On its best day, that's what Star Trek should have been about. And it's about a lot of other things too. It's about humanity. It's about groups. It's about people's emotions. It's about ideas. It's about there are four lights. It's about that. I get that part, but it's unfair that an idea like the Travelers wasn't given as much time as the character deserved. And for our what if today, for our episode's what if, we would like to, if for people who might not know, what if is a little segment that we like to do where we give you some food for thought and something you can ponder over in your own mind and share with us through our Facebook page or our Twitter page about how it would have gone. Today's what if is, what if Wesley in the future had become one of the Travelers, and we had a spin-off show or a spin-off series about the Traveler, and that Traveler was our older Eric Menuch's Traveler and Wesley Crusher the Traveler. How would that have gone? What conflicts would we have had? And would that show be a much different Star Trek than the Star Trek we know? But coming back to our Traveler, the Traveler that we were gifted with, there is a universe of ideas within that character. That character invokes some of the best people that our world was able to come up with. And I think it's an injustice that character is not given the credit that he deserves. But we are so lucky to have him, and he leads us to so many different better things. And on its best day, if Star Trek is so lucky, the Traveler is what it should aspire to be. And to end, there is one quote in Where No One Has Gone Before that Picard says when they get to the end of the universe. He says, any time entry is meaningless. And that, I think, is where the Traveler begins. Barry, let's go into your final thoughts on this.
As Shashank said, we're moving into our final thoughts. This is where we oftentimes will just sort of conclude all of the things, or at least come up with some final insights that give us better understanding of where we decided to explore in PoliTreks today. And I get the honors this episode because Shashank got to come up with the idea for the episode, so I get to have the last word.
It's only fair. It's only fair.
It is only fair. So my final thoughts start this way. Maybe, just maybe, we as a fandom aren't ready for the Traveler yet. Much like Wesley when he was in that amazingly crazy-looking corded turtleneck thing in Where No One Has Gone Before, that he wasn't quite ready to travel with the Traveler yet, and it took many seasons for him to get to that point. And in that time, Wesley had some ups and he had some downs, and he messed up a few times with fake Tom Paris, and had other issues, and wore some funny outfits and whatnot. I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Will Wheaton and what he did with that character, but it wasn't only just the fact that he wasn't ready, but he had to go through a lot to get to the point that he could travel with the Traveler. And as a fandom, we are currently going through something of an upheaval, and it's something that I don't necessarily want to go too in-depth on, but obviously there has been some talk over the new Star Trek series. And I think what this new Star Trek series is doing is it's testing our mettle. It's seeing what we're made of. It's trying to show us where we have some weak points in the armor that is the great suit that is the Star Trek fandom. And I think until we can figure those things out, we're not going to be ready for those bigger episodes, and things could end up descending into that kind of pew-pew, let's blow up stuff, action schlock that sometimes passes itself off for science fiction. Star Trek is about thinking, and it's about people. It's about us, and it's about how we react to each other. It's about how we interact with each other. And it's about our belief systems, both religious, political, spiritual, personal, moral, all of those things. We challenge ourselves with Star Trek. And so in those challenges, sometimes we can find characters that maybe we don't relate to or connect with as well. And that's our prerogative as people who consume Star Trek. But maybe we're just not ready for a character like the Traveler. We prefer the mischievous Q, or the mysterious yet extremely invested wormhole aliens or prophets instead for our four-dimensional species. In that, though, I would ask anyone, if they get some time on a rainy or snowy day, to pop open their favorite internet streaming service or their DVD box set collection and have another shot at the Traveler. I gave him another shot, and I've definitely found more to him. Finding a bit more about the actor as well has made me really like that character even more, and seeing something maybe a little bit deeper than maybe I didn't before. It's easy to poo-poo things, but it's difficult to find the good in certain pieces of our fandom, especially in Star Trek. So have another look at him. Look at him through maybe some different eyes. Step away, come back, see if anything changes. And if nothing changes, that's fine. But maybe it will. And if it does, welcome to this side. Because Mr. Avaru, you have won me over for the Traveler. And those are my final thoughts.
I am so happy I did. Before we end, I would like to make a declaration, and I would see if maybe you'd go with me on this declaration. You ready for this?
I am ready.
I think the Traveler is the most underrated character in Star Trek.
Oh boy. Well, there's some more stuff to talk about online, everybody. You can find us on PoliTreks, on Twitter, and on Facebook. I would say he's among the most underrated. That is for absolute sure.
Okay, well, that's just one more hurdle for me to get you through, so you're with me in the light. You can find us on Facebook at PoliTreks. You can find us on Twitter at PoliTreks, PoliTreks. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Shashank Avaru, without spaces on Twitter, SHANK and my first name, space last name, Shashank Avaru on Facebook. I would like for us to have met in person or have had a conversation so we can be friends, but I'm not opposed to having social media friends. What about you, Barry?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at BJORNDEFJORD, Bjorn de Fjord, on Twitter, and you can find me on Facebook at Barry DeFord, just BARRY space DEFORD. We're also going to be moderating our sites, PoliTreks sites as well, so feel free to converse with us through that. You can also find me on episode 6 of Disco Trek. As of this recording, I got the honor to sit down with our illustrious colleagues Heather and Jeff, and also
shout out to Jeff and Heather. Woohoo!
Yeah, we're really happy that I'm really happy that I got to go on there and talk about episode 7 of Star Trek Discovery. I was on there with Mr. Jamie McGregor. Shout out to you, my brother from down under. But you can find us in those places. Obviously, again, we always want to plug the idea of supporting us on Patreon. If you find yourself with a little bit of extra change, it's always important to get these podcasts up and running. The Tricorder Transmissions Network is very much a community-run podcast. I'm finding we do these things ourselves, and we always can use a little bit of help. If you find yourself, again, looking for more Star Trek content, you can always hop on the Tricorder Transmissions and look at the other shows that are on there. And if you find yourself with even more time, you can check out 2 of my good friends, Mr. Dan Davidson and Bill Smith, on the Trek Geeks podcast as well.
But before you do all of that, you have to go back and watch all the Traveler episodes, because the Traveler is the most underrated character in Star Trek. Have a good week, everyone.
Live long and prosper.